Well, hey, good morning, everybody. Good to see you guys. If you are new here, my name is John Wagler, and I am part of the team here. And just as Lacey said earlier, so thankful that you decided to join us. We really hope that if you're looking for a place to call home, that Hill City becomes that. And, we talk a lot about a safe place to explore your faith in Jesus, and what we mean by that is we want to create conversations here. We want to create some freedom to ask questions and develop our faith, and then to stay curious about that and continue to grow. And then eventually then what happens is that we start living like we mean it. And so that's kind of our heart here and what we want to do at Hill City. And so thank you so much for being here this morning. And before I get into the message for this You Have Heard series, I want to talk about one thing, and that's Influencers Weekend. That's coming up February 22nd, 23rd, just 3 weeks away. It's one of my favorite things that we do here. Lacey's clearly is Galentine's, but mine is actually what we do on this Influencers Weekend, because it's for everybody, not just some people. And but it's I'm really excited about it because it's about leadership and influence. And the thought process behind it when we first started it a few years ago was that we just wanted to keep doing things that helped us become better influencers and better leaders, and to understand what it means to be better at life. And so we put together a lot of material. We've got 8 different speakers. The Friday night from 7 to 9 is going to have a little bit more of a worship night feel. I'll kick it off speaking then. And then we'll have 7 speakers that Saturday from 9 to 2, kind of in TED Talk fashion. And so we'll be covering things, a wide spectrum around this idea of discipline, but a wide spectrum of things from how our brains work and staying curious, to emotional health and self-awareness, to physical and some spiritual health kind of things. And then Vernon Gordon, who's a pastor of Life Church on the south side, he's going to close out Saturday, and we'll have a little bit more time of worship together with that. And so it's going to be a fantastic weekend. How many guys would like to be better at life? Yeah, so then you should come. And so, that's the idea, all right? And so we're really excited about that. All right, so we are in week number 4 of this series, and so if you're just hopping in, this series is about what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. I was talking to my brother earlier this morning. We were just talking about having 3 services here, and because the second service is just so packed. And I said, well, last week I talked about white privilege. In the middle of the week I talked about abortion. This week I'm talking about lust, and next week about divorce. So we'll see if we need 3 after this whole run of topics, but that's just what it is. And so anyway, so the year is 1984, and I'm not going to talk about what happened to the governor, but the year is 1984, and it was an interesting year in pop culture. Apple, I don't know how many guys remember this. Apple came out with the Macintosh computer, the home computer, right? We have a picture of it. Do you remember this? Yeah. We've come a little ways, and so this happened in 1984. Also in 94, since this is Super Bowl Sunday, the Raiders actually beat the Redskins that year, and when the Redskins had something to root for, right? And so I'm a Bears fan, y'all. I had 1 year after that, so I can say that. But so the Raiders beat the Redskins in the Super Bowl. Michael Jackson had the album of the year called Beat It. We don't have artwork like that anymore. The song of the year was by Sting, which was Every Breath You Take. I don't know if you guys remember that one. This really cool, and I remember this really cool Saturday morning cartoon came on called Transformers. It was such a big deal. Gosh, I can remember more than meets the eye, right? So I remember that. And then the last one here is probably my favorite of all the pictures. It was Daniel's son. Can't happen, right? So it was 1984. What a great year in pop culture. But something else happened in 1984. 1984 for this 8-year-old boy was an interesting year. This 8-year-old boy grew up in a home where he didn't know his biological father very well, or at all, really. And so in 1984, this kid, there were some teenagers that came over to his house, and back then they had these TVs where they had these things called fine-tuning on the TVs. And what would happen is if the channel was scrambled up, you could use the fine-tuning in there, and you could sometimes get a pretty good black and white picture. And so these teenagers thought it would be cool or funny to show this 8-year-old boy the Playboy channel. And so these teenagers sit down with this kid, and they sit him down, and they essentially make him watch it. And one of the teenagers was also on his bus in the morning as they would go to this Christian school. And he thought it would be funny, bring him into the back, and he would always have him say bad words, bad cuss words that this kid didn't know even what they meant, and or would show him things in magazines. Part of what started to develop for this kid is a pivotal point in that year of 1984. And so what ended up happening is by the time you're 8 or 9 years old, and some of you guys may know this, I've referenced this before, about 80% of your worldview is shaped. Okay, now the rest of that 20% that happens afterwards can reshape a lot of that 80%. But so for this 8-year-old kid, not knowing his biological father didn't help. And then having been exposed to the Playboy channel and pornography at such a young age, what ends up happening is some things are shaped in a person's brain. And so you start viewing love and the opposite sex in a certain way, or intimacy or marriage in a certain way. Well, that kid's life started taking an interesting turn after that, and was kind of pretty normal, and or I should say stereotypical. And goes to school, becomes a teenager, and then boys sharing stories with other boys and stuff like that, and talking about hooking up with girls, and then at 14 years old becomes one of the first kids of his friend grouping to lose his virginity. And then for the next several years after that, continues to make decisions centered around how to actually sleep with women, or kind of selfish desires with girls. Well, now at 42 years old, that person is now standing on the stage, and now, I'm married now, got 3 kids, and we've been married for 18 years and have a great, great marriage. So what's standing before you is a picture or tangible evidence of God's restorative and redemptive promise and what he can do in someone's life, even no matter how something starts off. But I share that with you because what was ingrained in me at such a young age led me down this path of not understanding what love really was like, not understanding how I should really view sex, not understanding what lust actually does and what it means. And so it ended up reshaping my brain. Now I had to hit rock bottom to have God kind of speak into this, and so there's a longer story behind all of that. But here's what I know today. There are still things that have impacted me even at this point in my life. And had I had a good, strong view, an example, and things like that for me to understand at a young age, things would have been very different for me. And so what ends up happening is I think we let some things go. We let some things go. We allow things to become normalized that shouldn't be normalized. Now, obviously, an 8-year-old seeing a pornographic image is not normalized, and it should never be normalized. But here's just the reality. We live in a world with phones and computers and even just normal TV shows. TV shows now would have been considered pornography in the 80s, okay? So even now, what ends up happening is we normalize all of these things. And so kids at younger and younger ages are being exposed to things that they shouldn't be. Even how we view marriage and how we view the opposite sex and what we're shaping of our kids, it shouldn't be that way. And so I think it's important for us, and what we're going to look at in this passage, what Jesus teaches on the Sermon on the Mount, it's important for us to start thinking through how seriously we take this idea of lust. Thinking through maybe some things that we've normalized that are not okay. When Jesus was teaching, if you're just kind of hopping into this, he starts off in Matthew chapter 5. So Matthew is the guy who wrote this, and it's a letter he's writing so everyone can kind of hear or read the teachings of Jesus. And he puts together these collections of Jesus' teachings and provides kind of the longest section of a consistent teaching that Jesus has. And so it's Matthew chapter 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7. And so at the start of chapter 5, he kicks it off, and he has this high view for people. And he says, hey, this is what it looks like for the hearts of those that will follow me. The heart of those that may be in a season of life, you need to know and understand that, hey, even in the midst of everything, God's with you, and you'll be blessed because of that. And then he kind of continues from there, and he says, this is what should be built inside of you, this is who I am. He's kind of making some big statements. And then at one point, and this is what started last week, at one point he kind of pivots into more practical teaching. And last week we talked about how anger and what that does in us. And then he then pivots into this idea of what happens with lust and adultery. If you have a Bible, you probably see a title that says something about like Jesus teaches on adultery or thou shalt not commit adultery. All right, but what he's actually talking about is something very different. Something a little more meaningful. And the thing we've been saying every single week is this, and this is a line you'll hear every Sunday in this series, that what Jesus is doing as he's teaching is he's inviting us to follow and not just to listen. It's inviting us to follow, not just to listen. See, when we just listen, we can just sit and not do anything about it. But when we follow, it means we take in what has been said and then we actively do something. And that's what Jesus is telling us to do. And so I was thinking about a question for us too as we kind of process what he's about to teach. And this is the question I just want to frame this sermon with today. And it's this: do you believe your way or the Jesus way is better? Do you believe your way or the Jesus way is better? Because he's consistently doing something, and we're going to see it here again, where he's like, you heard it this way, but I'm telling you this. And so in Matthew chapter 5, here's what he says, in verse 27. You have heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery, which is the seventh commandment out of the 10 that they would have based a lot of their life off of. And he says, but I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now let me pause, because some of you might be thinking, it's just for the men today. This goes for everybody, okay? So like women, you can't be looking down at your man being like, so this is for everybody, all right? This is for everybody. So if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your hand, even your stronger hand, causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. Now, Jesus is going in right now. He's like, man, y'all, you've heard it one way, or your perspective is this way, but I'm telling you it's different. I'm telling you it's different. And he's tackling a subject that still to this day, 2,000 years later, he would say the same thing. You guys, and he again, understand, I think he would say this to us as Christians, if you call yourself a Christian, but he would say it to everyone. You've heard that this is normal, but I'm telling you it's different. You've heard about this, but I'm telling you it's different. I mean, think about it this way. Even in our culture right now, the idea of adultery isn't that bad of a thing. We've heard people say something like this: well, you know, they were both consented to it, and they were in bad marriages, they'd stopped loving their spouse, and, just stuff happens. So even like to that level, we've kind of normalized adultery. Think about shows that you watch that normalize adultery. Like, we normalize it. And so Jesus would say, hold on a second. Yeah, like I think we can, primarily the majority of people would say adultery is not good. It can hurt people and ruin families and all that other stuff, right? But he's like, but I'm telling you it's something far bigger than that. I'm telling you, you can't normalize this because man, it sends you down a different direction. And so the first thing, and this is really the main thing that I want to talk about today, is that cultural normatives are not spiritual directives. Cultural normatives are not spiritual directives. Just because culture deems something normative does not mean that it's spiritually effective for us, or it kind of points us down a spiritual path. But here's the problem. Sometimes we are discipled by culture way too much. Sometimes we are making things normal that should never be. My guess is all of us in this room have done that in some way or another. We have normalized behavior that Jesus would say, no, no way, no way. You have heard it this way, but I'm telling you, it's very, very different. Now, I get it. Sometimes it's because we come into this whole Jesus thing maybe later on. We've already made decisions and whatever, and I understand that part. Sometimes we come in without any knowledge of what Jesus taught, and so we're coming in so fresh that we don't understand what he actually did teach, and so we've made things normal, and so I get that. Sometimes it comes from where we grew up in the country or the church we went to when we were young, whatever, and those things impact how we view what's normal and what isn't. But Jesus, and this is why it's so important to keep going back to what Jesus taught. and opening up our hearts and our minds and having ears that actually want to listen and say, okay, hold on, what did Jesus actually teach about this? It's not, what he's going here is like, he's like, I'm not just talking about adultery. I'm talking about the thing that leads you there. And he gets very aggressive in his language towards it. You know, there was a time in our country where, in the late 70s, where this thing called the moral majority started happening. And they were folks that had really good intentions on the front end, honestly. They were looking at what was happening culturally. There was a big sexual revolution, and they were looking at what laws were in place, and they said, hey, we need to infuse, and I'm obviously paraphrasing everything that happened, but we need to infuse Christianity into policy and lawmaking and back into government and everything. And so they made this big push in essentially doing this. If you are a candidate and want our vote, then here's what you need to do. Okay? So on the front end, it sounds good because like, yes, we're going to get some Christian values and some things in there. And some stuff actually was good that they did. So I don't want to ever think that, or ever have you guys think that some of that wasn't good. But the end result of the moral majority ended up actually being, it was centered around power. And so when something gets centered around power, what happens? It gets corrupted. And so everything got corrupted. And so then candidates would lie and say, well, I'm this and I'm that, just to get your vote. And so we still have that today. Okay, so 40 years later, that's still prevalent kind of in our culture when it comes to the system that we have. And so that was the moral majority. And here's the end result that also happened. It bled into churches everywhere. So with this idea of power and authority and everything, it started to bleed into the church culture. And what ended up happening is churches became very judgmental and condemning towards people that didn't do exactly what they said to do. Some of you guys, if not a lot of you guys, are sitting here right now can tell stories about growing up in churches like that. And now, does that mean everything that happened in the 70s and 80s were bad in churches? No, there were some fantastic things that happened that actually I think we need to go back and look at to infuse into our churches now. There's some great things. But that's what we started to see. So as that happens, now we have this new moral majority. I don't know if you guys ever realized this, but we have a new moral majority in our culture. Or maybe it's a little more of an immoral majority. And here's what ends up happening. Now, and I'm just using this term kind of loosely because it's just easier to use, but now on the kind of far left or more liberal side to things, they've become the moral majority. And what happens with that is they determine what's right and what's wrong, and if you don't believe it, then they try and take you down, and it's about power, and it's gotten corrupted. On the front end, some things that were done were good, but it's gotten corrupted. All right, so that's this battle that happens with this, but then we normalize all these different behaviors within the context of it. And so Jesus is speaking to those same kinds of people at this moment. He's speaking to the folks that are like, hey, this is what you've normalized. You deem yourselves the moral majority. This is what you've accepted as normative. But you need to stop allowing that to infuse who you are and how you think about faith and how you go about life. And so he starts talking about them, and he goes, hey, we all know no one should commit adultery. I agree with you, but it's bigger than that. You heard it this way, but I'm telling you, lust is the problem. Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand of how many of you have ever been impacted by lust or have been an issue with it. But here's what I know. Everyone sitting in this room has had a problem with it or has a problem with it. But here's what I also know, is that quite often we normalize it. We deem it just, hey, this is the way things are. We think about the things that we elevate in our culture, whether it's music or movies. Think about it this way. If we didn't watch shows that elevated and empowered that kind of sexual, with anything to do with sexual, like scenes or promiscuity or whatever, if we didn't elevate and watch those shows and empower those shows, do you think they'd still be around? Sure, to a very small level. Why do they make so much money? Because we watch them. And so the ratings go up, right? We have watching parties over things. And so what do? We're elevating, empowering a lot of this stuff. Same thing with music and movies and everything else. And so what do? We're making it normal. You see, these guys are making things normal too. You see, Jesus is telling them, he says, hey, we all know you shouldn't go and try and sleep with someone else's wife. We know that that's not a good thing. And that's kind of, so these guys back then, they're like, they put that into that category, like, that's really bad, but you know what, we can do all of these other things leading up to it, and that's fine. So it's really no different than what we see now. The constant normalization of certain behaviors and thought processes when it comes to lust. And so Jesus says, no. You've got to understand what you've made normal before that you can see that my way is better. And so he's forcing them to start thinking, what's going on with lust in your heart, lust in your eyes, lust in your thoughts? What does it look like? What's happening with it? What are you watching? What are you listening to? What are you clicking on? All of those things. That would be the modern day equivalent of what Jesus would be saying to us. And here's what else he's kind of get them. Lust is the first part of everything, right? See, when we think about adultery, we know this, that lust precedes adultery. But guess what? Looking precedes lust. And so Jesus is trying to get everyone to see that and understand that. Why is he pointing that part out? Because he knows that it's always the little things that build into the big things. You don't make a big mistake or a big accident just deciding to that one day. It is little step after little step after little step after little step. Sometimes I hear folks say, oh, it's a slippery slope argument. And sometimes I think that argument can be foolish, like the slippery slope idea. But this would be a scenario that actually it's not foolish. Because there are some scenarios where it is a slippery slope. Okay? And so it's that little step. You're like, this is okay. It's fine. It's not that big of a deal. And then what happens? Well, then you feel comfortable in that step. And then the next thing that happens is like, well, I can take another little step because I'm still technically fine in this step. And so you take another one, and then another one. And here's what it ends up looking like. You're at the gym, and you see someone, and you take the extra route around where you might normally need to go to this section of the gym, but you go the other way just so you can what? Look at that person a little bit more. Or maybe you go or maybe you're at work and your office is technically over this way, but you're going to go this way and over here and over there to go talk to that person because you just want to like say something a little funny and just flirt a little bit more. Or you might click on make a couple more clicks just to see pictures on Instagram or on Facebook of an ex and just comment or like and just wonder if they've seen it. Or maybe it's just one little click that you're like, it's not that bad, I can look at this. And it leads to something else, and it leads to something else, it leads to something else. It is one little step at a time. No one wakes up one morning and be like, you know what, today's a good day for adultery. Today's a good day to get addicted to pornography. Today's a good day. Like, no, what happens? It's one step after one step after one step after one step. I think about my own past. After I lost my virginity at 14, it was pretty darn easy to just go back and have sex with someone else after that. Why? Because once you take that step, it becomes normalized and it's easy just to start there. That's why I think everything is just one little step, one little step, one little step, one little step. And so Jesus says, hey, you know what you got to do then in the other direction is take one little step. One little, see, we want to take it's like a lot of times will start happening, and whether it's pornography or just lust or sleeping around, whatever it is, we think, well, I don't want to do that stuff anymore. I need to take this massive little leap. And Jesus, I think, would end up saying, you know what you need to do, though? You need to take a little step, little step, little step, and then you start taking your big leaps. It's kind of like if you've ever done a vertical leap test. What do? They put this little mechanism up there, and they have some things shooting out the side, and you sit there, and you jump as high as you can, and you hit it, right? And then they measure how high you're able to get. Well, if you were to take one step back and then take one step forward, what ends up happening? Can you jump higher or lower? Higher. If you get a little more momentum, take 3 or 4 steps, it starts kind of tipping over, and then you can jump as high as you possibly can. Okay? So it's the same thing with us right now. What Jesus is trying to get us to understand is those little things that you've got to start getting in control of so that you can get the momentum so you can actually take the leap that you want to take. But you got to do the little things first. The little things deeply matter because then that's when we start seeing that there's a better way. So what is the little thing that we've got to understand? That temptation comes through our eyes. But temptation comes through our eyes. Here's a great question for you. How do you protect your eyes from lust? Not theoretically, Not theologically, but practically. How do you protect your eyes from lust? Even as a staff, everyone on all of our computers and phones, we have something called Covenant Eyes. And so it monitors where any of the sites we go to. And so why do we do that? Because we just want to have things, like we protect our eyes from the sun, don't we? We wear our sunglasses, we don't want UV damage. Everyone's like, I don't want cataract, blah, blah, right? We'll protect those eyes like crazy. But do we have practical ways that we protect our eyes from lust? Do we think about it? Are there mechanisms that are actually in place to do so? To make sure. What is that? That is a little step to begin to take. Isn't it better to forego something that's culturally convenient for what Jesus says is spiritually essential? Think about it this way. Jesus says for us to protect our eyes is spiritually essential. When he talks about gouging our eyes out, he's clearly not being literal. Otherwise, there'd be a lot of handless, eyeless people. But he's saying it's spiritually essential to protect your eyes. In order for you to fully connect with you've got to protect your eyes. This does not mean you can't look at someone and say, hey, they're attractive. It doesn't mean that, even when you think about, sometimes when we go down this road, people have taken this passage and they go, again, the extreme on this. And there was one guy, he's kind of a father of the faith. He was so ridden with lust all the time. He took this passage way too seriously. And every time to hurt himself, to try and make himself learn that he shouldn't lust, if he ever lusted after a woman, but it was really just, every time he thought a woman was attractive, he would jump naked into a thorn bush. Repeatedly, he was doing that. And it seems bizarre. He was trying to take it so seriously. He's like, I just want to rid myself of this. And so he would strip down and just jump into a thorn bush, sometimes several times a day. So Jesus isn't saying that. Please don't do that. But what he is saying is, do you take this seriously? It's not, listen, attraction is not lust. Okay, so if you end up being like, oh, that's an attractive person, that's okay. Arousal is not like a sexual desire, like those things. We can celebrate those things. They can be very healthy things. But lust says you start what? Wanting. You're selfish. You want coveting. You're kind of, I'm going to say this in a second, but there's a control aspect to it. You start looking at someone else's husband, someone else's wife, and you want it. Or you start thinking about what you want to do to them and for their own desires. Lust takes on a whole different way of thinking. See, what Jesus is actually talking about is that lust turns into an idol in our life. And we live in a culture where sex is clearly it's idolatry. And so you might be thinking, well, how do I know if something is an idol? And here are 4 quick little things. We base our identity off of it. Here's how we know this in our culture, that this is the way it is. We live in a space that would say, man, people will say, if I can't have sex, who am I? And you have, it's like your whole identity is wrapped up in it. The second one is you make decisions around it. This is what I'm talking about, that idea of you'll walk a little further just to go see that person. Or you'll click around enough, or you'll be secret enough, or you'll make decisions around it to make sure you can get it, whatever it is. The third one is you find your purpose in it. It's all you think about. It's all you want to do. If someone took it away from you, you'd be like, I don't know who I am anymore. I'm gone. Who am I? And the fourth one is we think we can't live without it. We can't live without it. That's how you know something has become an idol in your life. So Jesus is saying this is what happens with lust. And we've got to take it seriously. And so I want to list out a few things about lust that I hope will be helpful for you guys. The first one is this, is that lust is about power, control, and pride. Lust is about power, control, and pride. We see it as an opportunity. This is what pornography is, right? It's about selfishness, sure. But it's about power. It's about control. It's about pride, getting what you want out of a scenario. When you're coveting someone else, and you kind of have this thing, like, that's what I want. It's about power. It's about control. It's about pride. For some of you guys, maybe pornography isn't a thing, and I mean, there wasn't a thing for me either, and maybe it was the actual thing, but what was that? It was power. It was control. It was pride. The second thing is that lust releases the power of hell. Lust releases the power of hell. When he says this, he goes, when you have this going on, and he tells about your eyes and your hands, you might as well be like thrown into hell. And the word there that he's talking about is Gehenna, which was an actual place. And the word Gehenna was there in the city, and it was like a trash dump, and stuff was burning all the time. Sometimes people's bodies were buried there, and it was a just horrendous toxic thing that was released. And so Jesus is saying, like, this is what lust does. It releases power of hell. I wrote this down this week. Because of lust in our culture, here's what the end result is. So when sometimes people like say to me, I feel like you're being prude about that, Wags. I feel like it's too far, Wags. And I'll say, okay, here's what lust and kind of making this stuff like sexually normative brings us to. Rape, pornography, abuse, body image issues, sex trafficking, pedophilia, abortion, scores of broken homes, adultery, divorce, broken families, STDs, sexual identity issues, massive emotional health problems. That's where it's gotten us. Here's the thing. If we were all able to be like, hey, how does Jesus teach about this, and how do we think about it, and what if we all just kind of went about things the right way? And listen, I'm standing up here, I already shared I didn't, but if we all did, all of those things go away. So which way is more enlightened? Which way is better? You know who doesn't need counseling? You know who doesn't have like big issues to deal with? You know who isn't riddled with guilt and shame? Some of you guys know that. There are still times in my life, at 42, and again, my pivot point happened at 22. But there's still times at 42 years old where there'll be occasions where I'll be like, man, is that still in me? Or man, I feel a little shame or guilt about that. And I know the right answer to it. I know the redemptive nature of everything, but it still pops into my head. It shows what lust can do. Lust chooses using over union. Lust chooses using over union. Our bodies become commodities that are kind of bought and traded for. Lust promises what only love can deliver. Lust is never satisfied. Ever. And here's why. And I'm just talking about sexually, but you can actually put lust into other categories of your life. But Jesus is talking about sexually here. So lust is never satisfied. So when we go down the road of lust, here's what happens. As I said earlier, whatever your breaking point was or whatever your limit was at that one point, that's where you start next. If you guys can remember your nerves of your first kiss. If you can remember that moment, the nerves of your first kiss, you were just like, heart is right? What am I going to do? Am I going to bite her? Is she going to bite me? Are our teeth going to hit? Is this going to be so weird? All those things, right? But the second time, it was a lot easier. The third time, you didn't even think about it. So it's the same thing. Lust is never, it's always pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And listen, don't misunderstand. I'm not saying kissing is bad, but it's going to push, it's going to push, it's going to push. That's why pornography does what it does. The pornography is that image no longer satisfies. So you need something more deviant. That's why images of young children in pornography is skyrocketing. It's close to, now the most viewed is actually of young children than adults. Why is that? More deviant. You have to keep getting more and more deviant. Lust enslaves, but love liberates. Again, this is going back to we really think Jesus is the better way. All right, band, you guys can come back up. Because we're going to sing one last song together. So then what do we do? what do we do? Here's the first thing that we got to do. We got to grow spiritually. We got to grow spiritually. How do I grow spiritually? Well, there are disciplines that get put into place where you get involved here. You serve on a team. You're in a small group. Your even personal life of prayer and study is kind of increasing. There are disciplines there that help you grow spiritually. And we stay curious and we keep learning and everything. Those are all elements to grow. What's interesting is one of the fruit of the Spirit, which is the kind of what's listed in Galatians 5. One of them is self-control. So what this means is like the way that we get better self-control is to be further connected into the Spirit of God. So we need discipline to be able to do that. So we need to grow spiritually. And the second thing was be practical. Be practical. If you don't have a plan with this, and you haven't messed up yet, you're just lucky. You need a plan. You got to create boundaries. You got to be able to say, this is how I'm protecting myself. This is how I'm keeping myself, away from temptation. This is how I'm making sure I'm not making a stupid decision. All those things. You need a plan that's in place. Something that's very tangible that you can look to. Stuff on your computer. We'll release some resources too this afternoon that can help with all this. So you need a plan. Before we sing this last song, I also want to say this. This was not about guilt or shame on anybody. What I wanted to do today was just get us to see how serious it is. I know that there's shame in this room. Maybe not for everybody, but I know for some people there is. I know there's guilt in this room. I know. But when I say that Jesus is a better way, here's what I also mean. That he can take that guilt and shame and flip it. I can freely talk about my past and everything because I know and I've experienced the fact that Jesus can come in and not just forgive, but he can restore. And not just restore, he can give you a whole new life. You view everything differently if we'll open ourselves up to it. And he takes that shame and he takes that guilt and he says this, I am better and bigger than that. That thing that you're holding on to was not too big for me to die on a cross for. That thing you're holding on to, when I resurrected from the dead and showed you power and victory over sin, guess what? That takes on that too. You don't need to hold on to it anymore. You can just see that there's a better way. Will you guys stand and sing this last song with us?
Solid gold, the riches that could buy my dreams. You are better than all these things. The prettiest face to turn their eyes, beauty that could hypnotize. You open doors that looks may bring. You are better than all these things. Your love is better than life. You are the well that won't run dry. I have tasted and I have seen. You are better than all these things. The power that could shake. You are the well that approval that outshines the sun, and cheered by all who think of me. You are better than all these things. You are better than all these things. 'Cause your love is better than life, and you are the well that won't run dry. And I have tasted and I have seen you are better than all these things. Your love, 'cause your love is better than life, and you are the well that won't run dry. And I have tasted and I have seen you are better than all these things. Oh, you are better than all these things. Sing your love. 'Cause your love is better than life. You are the well that won't run dry. And I have tasted and I have seen you are better than all these things. You are better than all these things.
So God, this morning, I hope that we will see that your way is better. That we won't hold on to the past. We won't hold on to what we have deemed normal, but that we would see that you've got a better, more liberating, more free way to live this life. That we would want to draw closer to you, that we would want to say yes to you, that we would want to say, I want to follow you because I know it's going to lead me to more freedom. And so, God, whatever folks are wrestling with in this room, whether it's they're on the brink of doing something really dumb, something that could ruin their life, or maybe they've already done something that they just regret so much, or maybe they've normalized something in their relationship that they shouldn't have. God, I pray that we would start seeing that your way is better. That we would believe in the power, believe in the victory that you have for us. God, it requires us to say yes to you first, and then a yes to you every day after that. So God, I pray that we won't be riddled with shame or guilt, but that would be released in finding freedom in your better way. I pray that we would long for self-control, because we know when we're connected to you, that's where we feel like who we are supposed to be, who we were designed to be, and where we find our greatest purpose and our greatest hope and our greatest freedom. And so we thank you that you're better. We thank you that you're bigger. And we thank you in you we find freedom. You know me pray. Everybody said, amen, amen. Hey, if you want to pray with somebody, we've got folks over here that are ready to pray for you. If there's just something that's still stirring in you, they are ready and waiting. If you'd like to talk to someone a little bit further about taking next steps in your faith, about how to get connected here, please stop by the What's Next Lounge. And also, too, just thank you guys so much for your just continued generosity. Sometimes people say, like, you guys don't need more money. And I'm like, no. When we give, it's such a blessing to give, and then here's what happens when we give. We are able to bless others, and so it's so cool to do that. And so if you did want to give today, you can do it in the share boxes on your way out, or there's directions how to do that online in your seats. Thank you guys so much for being here, and we will see you all next week.